We are recording. Yeah, so we have
Great.
Fred Hasselman from the University of Radboud Nijmegen, and my name is Matti Heino from the University of Helsinki, and we're going to have a short chat on some issues that we have encountered lately on that ought to be perhaps clarified regarding methods to study complex systems such as humans. So I have a few statements here, and I was wondering if I could get your comments or thoughts about those. And so the basic idea is that we have these methods to study complex systems, but on the other hand, there are these existing multi-level modeling techniques, and so what I hear often is that the multi-level modeling can account for the idea follow meaningfully different change trajectories and develop and change with time. So you could have these multi-level structural equation models and use that to do this what's now called ideographic science. And so the idea is that you can then test this by looking at whether there is significant variability around the change process that characterizes the average over time. So do you have any thoughts on using multi-level modeling for complex systems analysis?
Well, it's always the case that you need to be aware of the assumptions that you're making when using a method, right? So, so we used when I say we, like Merlijn and our team here and Günther Schipek's team, when we analyzed their data in clinical psychological science. We also used a multi-level type statistical model, which was multi-level survival analysis, basically. But let's say the way we organized the data was such that we could kind of be sure that we were actually looking at these individual features of the trajectories that individual patients were having. So let's say, yeah, it depends a bit on how you organize the data. It depends a bit on what exactly you're asking. So if you're asking things like, is it the case that on average, and this was the case in this clinical psychological science paper, that on average, when clients experience a shift, a sudden gain or loss in their symptom severity, these were clients with mood disorders. Is it the case that sometime before there has been a peak in this dynamic complexity measure, right? So this does not specify when so when in the trajectory this occurs. It does not, let's say, specify exactly. Well, yeah, it does a little bit, of course, assume that there is a relationship between the peak strength and the occurrence of a sudden gain or loss. That is indeed in the model. So yeah. So but the most important thing is these multi-level models cannot deal with interdependence between levels, right? And I think that's one of course, one of the hallmarks of complex systems, right? So it's not, of course, not the case that you can equate these levels in such a model directly to, let's say, to levels, physical levels or temporal scales or something like that. But it is, I think, yeah. So you really have to think about what is it that I need from the group of people that will, what does this average represent? Again, in the case, I think, as we used it in psychological, in clinical psychological science, we were interested. Is it the case that, if you know this event occurs, this sudden shift in gains or losses, is it the case that on average something happened just a couple of days before, right? So, I mean, that's kind of, then you need a statistical model. But if you want to know something for one specific person, I mean, it is, of course, not. I don't think you can you can get much out of those types of models. And also, of course, we used time series, right? So we used information from the time series data. And so in these event occurrence models, you just have sequences of zeros and ones, and so then the one indicates an event occurred or not. And that's also not always the case in these multi-level analysis. So if you really would have like a multi-level time series analysis, there is of course the multi-level VAR model, network model. You still get into all kinds of with, for example, what is the time scale that you're evaluating? What are the correlations that you allow in the data? I mean, usually this is just like a lag 1 correlation that is modeled. So a lot of problems can be summarized, or a lot of things that you cannot do with these multi-level models can be summarized by the assumption of independent observations, I think, and independent levels. Well, of course, if the levels are just only individuals, then that's fine. But usually the levels are the time points also, right? So they are nested within an individual. And then if you have multivariate time series, then things become more and more complex, and those will definitely not also, I think, cannot be assumed to be independent. So the short version is it depends on what you want to know. I don't know. Does it? Yeah.
Yes. So you mentioned the multi. Can be very understand some phenomenon in the way that you can, for example, get some weight on a parameter that says that, okay, so if this happens on day 1, then it's likely that this will happen in day 2, and so the cross, what do you call it? The cross correlations, or so those are quite nice for a researcher to think that, okay, so if this happens, then that happens. But can you get the same sort of an idea with some of the complexity methods?
But when you say this, you mean on average, right?
Yes.
Because, or are you talking about individual level analysis?
I'm talking about the multi-level VAR where you have the individuals and the group levels separated into two.
Because I think I'm not sure if the multi-level ones, but of course the VAR models, if you have like multivariate time series data, then you could do it for a single person. But usually those models are have group data also. So your question is, can you get this? Can you get what exactly from?
So can you use complexity methods to determine like if this happens, then that happens, or like effect size magnitudes or something like this that people are used
Well,
of.
yeah, but well, the thing is, it depends a little bit on what you call complexity methods, of course. But if you want to know something about, if you're talking about effect sizes, or if you're talking about this has this effect on that, you hidden inside that question is an assumption about the idea that it is in fact possible to distill some kind of unique variance or some unique causal power from these data, and then know that it is going from one entity, one variable that you measure, to another one. So let's say these network models assume Granger causality and the assumptions that are necessary for Granger causality, which has to be, so if you're thinking about a network, has again, independence of nodes, independence of and in this case this would be then if it's a multivariate data set, well, the nodes are usually variables that were measured. So yeah, I don't think that's actually possible. So in the complexity methods, you get concepts that are sort of trying to of course capture the idea of let's say influence, but then it's called something like, for instance, coupling direction, right? So all these variables, all these processes are coupled, and it can be the case that you can observe that one process is more like is more like has like a positive coupling to another process, but it could also be like processes can like inhibit the growth of another, or they can support it, or they can have like more complex relations, like mutually supportive and then reducing again. So let's say these different types of feedback loops you can have in things that can change, like in these growth models. That's more the thing that these complexity measures can get you. So coupling direction you could have that one process is responsible for changes in another, but not the other way around, for example, or to a much lesser extent. And those are things you can actually figure out. And there are different ways to do that. So you have these cross-mapping methods, and then some people are not sure whether that applies also to human behavior. So there's some things to figure out, but there are also simpler methods based on recurrence quantification or directed information type measures, like what's it called? Some kind of entropy measure that is more directional. So the those things are possible, but don't expect to get answers that will give you like, this is now the effect size, or this is the contribution, because that's another thing. You expect these things will change, in fact. So they might change between, or be different between individuals, but within an individual even, it is expected that these coupling dynamics, let's say, are subject to change. So these are not fixed parameters in any way, and the only thing you can do is look at let's say the snapshot that you observed, and describe how it is at that point in time. So again, it depends what you mean by effect size and influence and those kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay, so next question. Often these often we get mixed up in the term interaction because when we're talking about complexity, we're talking about that many things interact with each other. But then we, on the other hand, we have the interaction term in linear regression, and what I hear often is that that we can study interactions by just looking at these interaction terms. Do you have an idea on how to clarify this?
Yeah, well,
what's the difference between interdependence and interaction in linear regression?
Well, yeah, I don't know. So formally, actually, if you find a significant interaction in your regression model, this means that that you lose a particular property of the variables that you put in, the predictors that you put in the model, and that's the additivity. So at the moment, if you have a simple regression model or a ANOVA or whatever, you find a significant interaction. Basically, what you're saying then there is it's actually not a linear model anymore, because the variance that you're observing is conditional on another, if it's a categorical, but it could also be a continuous predictor. It's dependent on the values of another variable, and this is essentially, I think in some ways it is very much what is meant when we talk about interdependence. Of course, you can if you know in a regression you can choose which one is the moderator and which one is affected by the moderator, right? That's open, and there's no, I mean, there's statistically that's equivalent, right? Which one you choose should be guided by theory or something like that, or maybe you're doing an experiment. So then it's kind of obvious which one should be the moderator, but statistically, that it doesn't really matter which one you choose. You just have observed that, in fact, you should not model those data using a linear model. I mean, that's basically the conclusion. You won't see those conclusions in papers very often, but no, but that's why it's. I think, I think many statisticians, by the way, have pointed out that it's not very often that people actually, for example, predict those types of interactions, and if they do, usually they're not interpreted correctly. But anyway, to go to the interdependence, suppose that what you have observed there would be within an individual. So that's obviously not often the case in these regression models, but that's what we're talking about when we're talking about complex systems. Usually we're talking about the coupling of the many components that exist within the system. You could think, okay, maybe I can model complex systems using these kind of conditional dependencies. And then you get, of course, quickly again into trouble, because once you've established these kind of if-then rules, these things are likely to change over time. Maybe not all of them, but most of those couplings are likely to change. And so that's where you run into problems with the linear model. It's static, and it and in fact by showing that stuff is indeed interdependent, you're saying, okay, so I cannot use this. I cannot use linear regression, or I cannot use my regular statistics. Was that kind of a question? Was it what was the question? Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was thinking about in relationship to the previous question. So what I always like to say is you have to observe causality and don't infer it. Right? Don't infer causality, observe it. And what I mean by that is, yeah, there are no perfect statistical models that once you're handed data that will give you a nice result that says, oh yeah, here causality flows like this, and then it goes here and then it goes there. Those do not exist. Think about the problems they have. Well, let's say convincing everyone about climate change and how that is caused. What they are doing is they gather data that is not open from a system that's not open to experimentation a lot, right? So it's all records of many years ago, ice cores, and then the atmosphere, and so it's all inference based on the data, right? But what we can do is we can go into a lab and do an experiment. Mm-hmm. So that's observing causality. And if you have experimental control, or at least set up an experiment in which you can get a system into one state and then perturb it a little bit and then see what happens, right? So that you know something happened and you know the direction maybe that you're pushing the system in, and those kinds of things. So in the end, no matter what, no matter how fancy your method is, you will need to shake up the system and study it as it is behaving in the wild, let's say. Mm-hmm. Right? And I think we can do that. I mean, behavioral science is. I mean, that's if we've done one thing, we've shown that we can produce a whole bunch of papers on minute changes in experimental setup, and then build a career on the differences. But I mean, no, but I really mean I really believe that part of behavioral science should be cherished and kept and expanded further, because right now with the factorial designs it might be a little bit biased towards, let's say, the type of analysis or the type of statistical model that you prefer. Mm-hmm. Right? So we might need to adopt some more let's say contemporary research designs, like perturbation analysis, those kinds of things. But in the end, if you want to infer causality, you have to observe it. And don't use some kind of statistical method to infer it just from your data.
So is this also your answer to moderated mediation models? Because many people think that, okay, so I have this moderated mediation, which is essentially the essence of complexity, because it involves different things changing depending on the context.
Moderated mediation, but again, I'm going back to the assumption of independence. I think moderated mediation does not solve anything regarding dependence or interdependence. I mean, are there specific models that you are referring to? Because you can do this, of course, also with just very simple classical regression steps, like this famous SPSS syntax.
Yes, the Hayes.
The Hayes thing. And then you can be more sophisticated, like also multi-level stuff, do cross-level interactions and those kinds of things. But again, I think moderation. What are you trying to do there? What are you trying to do if you're trying to show moderation? you're trying to show conditional dependence of one thing on another, and observe this. I mean, if it's possible, go into the lab and manipulate these levels of these things that you think the other thing depends on, right? Yeah, and the mediation, of course, implies like a temporal delay, right? So you need to have at least 2 time points, I guess. Yeah, for mediation. Yeah. And well, yeah, 2 time points might be time in the world of statistics, but but if you're studying change processes, that's of course that's not change. I mean, that's just two snapshots. So I don't know how far the developments have gone in terms of time series analysis, but I doubt that there's some kind of sound, valid method that will give you those types of analyses for like a multivariate time series data set, or maybe I don't know them. I mean, I think when you're talking about mediated moderation, are you talking about like just a couple of measurement points, or?
Well, there are now. I think people are starting to gather more, and but I think 10 is considered many.
Yeah. 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 What I think is, so sometimes I mean, one of the great things about being interested in like, let's say, a complex systems approach is that you are also getting input from latest developments in other scientific disciplines. And of course, the physicists, they have actually situations where Granger causality is the best choice. I mean, you know, I've been talking to physicists for the past couple of years, and if you're really talking to like experimental physics, you know, they will say, yeah, independence. It's not. We don't think it's really there. You know, they have the same type of problems when they go more complex than like you know, 3 particles, right? Or like fields, magnetic fields, and those kinds of things. So, but it is interesting, you know, they can have kind of they can create situations in which these independence assumptions actually make sense. Let's say, right? You know, their smallest units don't remember stuff. You know, they don't have a history, and if they interact with others, then it's kind of predictable what they do. Except, you know, if you scale this up, then you get these, of course, all these emergent phenomena that are not quite obvious. But anyway, there are of course also physicists who look at other systems than just particle systems, right? So if you looked at the climate studies and or biological and ecological stuff, most of the techniques that I think are useful for us are coming from those fields, and they are not doing mediated moderation to figure out why it is the case that one ecosystem is dying and the other not, and how you can solve it. And no, what they use is the language of dynamics and dynamical systems and coupled dynamical systems, and that's what their models look like. They have the growth models. differential equations, a couple differential equations, and then the techniques that they developed to deal with this, to deal with those type of questions. They are also based on those, let's say those mathematics. Mm-hmm. You could say the mathematics of time or the mathematics of change, and no matter how you look at it, most of the solutions that we see in behavioral science that are becoming more and more complex, by the way, when they're trying to incorporate time, are just departing from the wrong set of assumptions, because they're departing from the assumption that you're basically dealing with a system like 100 dice, that you throw, and then the values that pop up are all independent. That's basically what all those techniques are based on, and that's complex systems don't operate that way. I think we'll see more of these techniques and models in behavioral science, and in fact a lot of those network models and the kind of simulations that have been done on depression, and they are based on ecological models in the end. So change is slow in science.
Yeah, so one novel-ish research design that's been becoming more popular recently is the measurement burst design, where individuals answer survey questions intensively for example, 5 times a day, every 5th week over 1 year or something like this.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts regarding these sorts of designs?
Great. Great. I do think there's a lot of questions still that need to be answered. So one of the things I've looked into is, if you're going to ask a human being every day, how do you feel? Well, what you will get into is the fact that their evaluation at some point will become dependent on what they remember from what they've said before, right? So again, a matter of can we assume that all our observations are independent? Well, no, of course not. I mean, there are a whole lot of correlations going on there, and this what Marlijn has shown in our recent paper in BMR medicine. Is it BMR? Yeah. Well, BMJ. I'm going to look it up now. That's kind of stupid not to know. Anyway, so there we've shown how, let's say, how severe the presence of these long-range correlations actually is in those intensely measured time series data. And complexity in psychological self-ratings, implications. This is still the preprint, but it's I think it's out now.
Yes.
BMC medicine.
BMC medicine, yes. Yes, that's a great paper. I really love that piece.
Oh, thank you. Well, you are the complexity lobby, so that's always good to hear. No, so yeah, there it's quite clear that most variables that are referring to some kind of internal state that you have to evaluate. So, did you sleep well last night? That you have to think, okay. But what are you doing when you're making this evaluation? If last weekend you didn't sleep at all because you were tossing and turning, and this was the first night you actually slept, you had a good night. Yeah, but this might still be a couple of hours compared to no sleep at all.
Mm.
So you get all these problems that have to do with the fact that these kinds of experiences do not live on a characteristic scale. People will interpret the scale differently. The extremes of the scale will change due to experience. And if you measure someone like a whole year, really, and you ask them, are you sad today or something like that? Well, of course, this will change if there is a life event in which a loved one or a relative dies, right? So everything, all evaluations will all of a sudden now be with respect to that event, which is the worst event you have experienced, probably. Mm-hmm. So those kinds of things occur, and they occur constantly. There are some things you could do to sort of kind of accommodate a little bit with that. So you can have kind of filters on the data to take into account the fact that people evaluate maybe what they've been saying for the last week or something, or for the last couple of days. All in all, and then so that's one thing. So that has a little bit to do with, of course, what do those data actually mean? So I think the scale that you use for these ratings, these evaluations. So I call these things, let's say, internal states, and then the way they change is in internal state dynamics. Mm-hmm. Right, so that's also a term in physics. So complex systems with internal state dynamics, or complex systems with internal degrees of freedom, which is referring to the fact that, the thing you observe on the outside is just a configuration of a specific configuration of the internal degrees of freedom, but this might change. We just cannot directly observe them, and this also happens in more complex physical systems. But so that's one thing. The other thing is, how often do you sample? So a lot of people want to, when they started using these experience sampling method techniques, they started out doing things like, let's do 80 measurements in one day, and then we're done in a week, right? Because then you have 7 times 80 data points, and then you know what's going on. Yeah, well, you do have a lot of data points, but what have you measured? I mean, you should not let the analysis decide how long you measure. You should let the processes that you're interested in decide this. Mm. And excuse me. So is it really the case that if you're interested in depression, for example, that you need to know 10 times a day how somebody feels? I think that's probably not not a sensible thing to do. Mm-hmm. Maybe 2 times a day, or maybe 1, or you can also think about just asking at the end of the day, how often did you feel sad today, or something like that, right? So there's a lot of, and of course, or in the case of anxiety, for example, today I was anxious so many times. So then you take it a little bit away out of the evaluation. But you can still, if you're interested in these things that are a lot more like panic attacks or anxiety bouts, you can still have an idea about how often this occurs each day, without having to ask. So if someone has had 5 panic attacks, you're also not going to get those if you randomly ask someone 5 a day, did you have a panic attack? Because they could occur in 1 hour, or I don't know. Mm-hmm. right? So there are a lot of things that could be, I think, improved, or at least have to be figured out. And I have the feeling that right now people are not always thinking about what it is they are actually measuring. So the idea there is, let's take depression again. We know that even even in the most successful cases with intervention, this still takes like many weeks, months, right? So the scale at which this overall average mood, let's say, this state fluctuates between, well, not depressed and clinically depressed. I'm not saying happy, but right. So the difference between being able to go to work and function relatively okay, and not being able to do anything, that fluctuates at a scale of maybe 6 months or maybe longer, right? So that's really a slow changing thing, and so it might of course be the case that daily fluctuations do something, but I think this you just have to figure out, and I don't see a lot of people doing that. So in this paper that you liked, it also turned out that, you know, asking whether you're hungry several times a day, and other more physiological like things. I think, what was the other thing? Tired, maybe, yeah, something like that. That actually results in a time series that has almost, well, or very little temporal correlations. At least not any of the long-range temporal correlations that you see with these other more psychological variables. Now you could say, yeah, hunger is an internal state, right? But if you want to observe the fluctuation in the feeling of hunger that someone has, you would really have to ask them maybe every hour if they're hungry, but because then you will see, maybe in the morning, and then it's okay, and then in the afternoon goes up again, and then in the evening goes up again. Then you get this circadian rhythm. But if you ask like 2 or 3 times a day on a random point in the day, there will be no association there. Although undoubtedly there is a fluctuation pattern there. So the question, you can ask those kind of questions. So is feeling happy the same thing as feeling hungry? Right? Is feeling anxious the same thing as feeling hungry? Maybe that's actually more related to feeling hungry than feeling sad, because, well, especially if you're depressed, this is probably not fluctuating a lot, but at a very, very low point all the time. So think about what it is that you're interested in, what the dynamics of this process are, which means what is the level of fluctuation that I need to sample to get something meaningful. And sometimes you cannot know this in advance, and you'll just have to try, I guess.
Okay, thank you. That's all for now, and let's see if we can meet up later and have a chat too.
Okay.
Okay.